Good evening, everybody. Welcome onto the platform. And for the folks joining from United States, good morning. So we have a wonderful panel here. This session is about entrepreneurship and the art of data science. Here in this session, we will learn about nuanced approaches to business models exploiting data science for enhancing health, wealth, and wisdom. So for this wonderful session, we have a moderator here, Ganesh Mani. He's an entrepreneur and investment manager, adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon, TI Pittsburgh he's on the board of TI Pittsburgh, and he's also a charter member there. He's an experienced professional with expertise in areas of investment management, financial services, startup and IP strategy, knowledge-intensive services, low-cost and world-class innovation. Ganesh has been featured on ABC Nightline and in a Barron's cover story titled New Brains on the Block. Mr. Mani has an MBA in finance and a PhD in artificial intelligence from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as is a computer science degree from the prestigious college in India, which is Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Ganesh, thank you so much for bringing so eminent speakers onto the platform. And I'll hand over the baton to you to take it forward. Wonderful.
Thank you, email. But let me get started. I should say welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and these days machines, because there are a lot of smart machines monitoring these programs. We have an esteemed set of panelists, investor, that's Vikram, entrepreneurs, Allison and Bindu, who will join us momentarily, and one of the bigger corporate representatives, Shailesh here. But let me sort of spend 30 seconds talking about why I think data science is more of an art, right? Computer programming, econometrics, these were sort of the foundations that eventually became data science. And those are considered a bit of an art, much like an artist chooses the raw materials, the inputs, and then decides how to assemble the elements, what tools to use, and then it's up to the user to interpret sometimes the finished product. That's what it ends up being with respect to a data science project as well. Often the output needs to be interpreted by experts, and there may not be a consistent or unanimous interpretation. So I think it gets very interesting. I've been around the data science field now for a couple of decades, and the gray hair makes me even more convinced that it's a bit of an art. So there's a lot of creativity that comes into refining the insights. Now we also have our fourth panelist on the screen. Hi, Bindu, welcome from Abacus. I think we're going to start with 5-minute presentations from the panelists. So Allison's going to go first, then Vikram, then Shailesh, and Bindu, that'll give you a chance to catch your breath. And Ravi, thanks again for monitoring. And audience members, feel free to put in your questions, because after the first 20 minutes, I have a couple of questions that I'm going to run through, but I want to keep it interactive and want to make sure we provide you some good food for thought. So with that, take it away, Allison.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. We are members at Blastpoint of TI Pittsburgh, and we really appreciate all the support and help we've gotten from them. One of my best executives we met through our connections at TI Pittsburgh. My name is Allison Alvarez. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Blastpoint. I'm a 2-time Carnegie Mellon graduate, both of the School of Computer Science and the School of Business. I have a master's degree in language technologies from the School of Computer Science and an MBA from the School of Business. And I'm here to talk to you about how we use data basically to tell the future. So we work with large corporations to help build lifelong relationships with their customers using the existing data resources they have on hand that are most of the time not being used to the maximum purpose that they could be used for. So in a lot of cases, we're talking about long-term relationships. So we're not just trying to understand how customers are going to behave, the decisions they're going to make this month or next month. We're talking 6 months from now or even a decade from now. And just to give you an example of what this looks like during the COVID crisis here in the United States. So most utilities right now, 22 US states are under a moratorium, which means you can't shut off someone's gas, water, or electricity during the pandemic, which honestly is as it should be. But it means that many utilities are owed literally billions of dollars more than they would be otherwise because people are not prioritizing their utility bills. And so we work with these utilities in a lot of cases to understand who their customers are and understand exactly where they are. So when people aren't able to pay their bills, it's for a lot of different reasons. And so we've got customers who they're just a little bit behind. Maybe they forgot to pay their bill that month. They might just need a nudge. And understanding what separates that customer from one who is newly unemployed, has never applied for assistance before, has never taken advantage of programs to lower their bill, versus customers who have been in financial distress for a while and have already been through the system. So you're going to talk to all these customers really differently. And if you know who to talk to when and how, you can really increase the optimality of every single touch point a customer has. So for example, by knowing those customers who just need a nudge, one of our customers was able to recover $400,000 in just a week. And they were able to do that by increasing the impact of people answering the phone. So they were able to route calls through their call center very efficiently. So if somebody had 5 minutes, they knew exactly who to call and who would write a check for full right on the spot. So we've had really great results for our customers. We do anything from predicting billing and payments, like I just discussed, all the way up to understanding at a nationwide level who's going to be the next buyer of electrical vehicles and why. And this functions, not just at the macroeconomic level, but looking at rooftop by rooftop, how are individual households going to make decisions. And by understanding these things, we've done things like save our customers $1.6 million in postal costs, or increase their customer engagement by more than 600%. So by understanding your customers, using your existing data, and sometimes augmenting it with outside data, you can really build these profiles. And there's this art versus science part of it. One of the things we think about it is data isn't just numbers, it's relationships. And so a lot of times the way we frame data is in personas. And so looking at our previous slide, these are all personas. So we're thinking about people, humans, relationships, which is messy the way that art is messy. And so that's our approach. And we think it really fits in with the theme of this forum. So I really want to thank you guys for having me here. And I really look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Allison. And speaking of paying bills, I think Vikram allows entrepreneurs to pay their bills as an investor. So next up, Vikram, we'd love to hear about IVCAP.
Talk to you about what we do at IVCAP and, give you a perspective from an investor. Just to briefly introduce myself, I am the founder and managing partner of IVCAP Ventures. We manage about $200 million of assets under management. And my own background is prior to setting up IVCAP, almost about 10 years ago. I was earlier the founding member of a $100 million life sciences and healthcare private equity fund in India. And prior to that, I was with IBM in the US, focused on the US healthcare life sciences business, starting with the business intelligence part of it and then going into genomics area. So worked in the US for quite some time. So my background is, consulting, healthcare, and I've worked across different industries. Just to give you a brief about what we do at IVCAP. We currently manage 3 funds. So in the process of raising another fund, which is going to be focused on investing through SDG lens. And I think many of you probably might already be familiar with what is SDG. The SDG is basically Sustainable Development Goals. And what we realize is that the whole world is now moving towards sustainable investing. So what we realized that, if you can measure impact, which is what the SDG framework provides you, it becomes very interesting. And we've actually seen that the impact of returns or impact of using the SDG framework on the returns is actually very interesting. So many times people think that if you're focused on impact, you may be compromising on your returns. But what we are noticing is that SDG framework actually provides for measuring the impact across various goals. In fact, it has a framework of about 17 goals and 169 targets. And when you actually start, monitoring your portfolio based on that framework, you notice that there's a substantial positive movement towards generating much larger outcomes in terms of profitability and returns. But that said, our differentiator lies in the fact that we are investing through this alumni ecosystem of the IITs. In fact, the IIT Alumni Trust is our anchor investor across our funds. And that also brings a lot of value along with the capital. When we invest in a portfolio companies, we actually bring a lot of talent through our mentor structure. In fact, Ganesh, himself is actually part of a mentor pool. And we believe in adding a lot of value in addition to investing across the journey of the entrepreneurs while we are invested in the companies. Of course, we also have created a platform called IVCAP. And interestingly, that platform itself is using AI. So what we've done on that platform is a large number of startups are coming on the platform. In India, we are saying there are 50,000 plus startups now registered with the government of India. And it's practically impossible if you're looking at thousands of startups at the same time with a small team trying to evaluate which startups to invest in. That's where we decided to create this platform to actually integrate AI into the platform itself and actually create a scoring system where we are able to identify a shortlisted set of startups, which we actually then take to the next level and start evaluating further. I do believe personally that it's quite possible that, a significant part of investing decisions can also be automated over a period of time. I think it's quite possible that maybe a few years from now, almost 80 to 90% of the decisions that the venture capitalists take can actually be automated because, many of these decisions are, quite standard in terms of, how you decide on certain things. In terms of our investment approach, we look at investing between $100,000 to $7 million ticket size, starting from seed, going up to Series A, Series B. We are sector agnostic, and we have a portfolio of over 20 companies. IVCAM platform, which I already talked about, has startups on one side. There are over 500 mentors, accelerators. There are also individual investors, corporates, even universities like IITs and IIMs and quite a few other institutes who are actually on the platform. I think it's relevant to understand why SDG is important. And, we believe that over the next 10 years, this particular framework is actually going to be quite important, especially because the amount of investment required to bridge this entire gap to realize the SDG goals by 2030 is pretty sizable amount of funding which is required. And in India, this is relatively a new concept. Historically, ESG has been the framework that people have been using so far. But one of the key challenges with that framework is that the quantification of the impact becomes a little challenge if it is not clearly defined, and that's where the SDG framework actually comes in with very specific set of goals. There are 17 goals, and behind these 17 goals, 169 targets. And then behind these 169 targets are very specific action points, which actually combine with the overall mission and the vision of the companies, that, try to accomplish their objectives. And in the process, not only they are actually creating returns for the investors, they're also making a huge social impact. So something that we believe has a completely new way of investing. This is a view of our portfolio mapping on the SDG framework. This is a representative set. What we've done is each of our companies, we've tried to map on specific targets and the goals that they try to work with. Interestingly, this is not just about mapping the goals and the framework. It's also bringing in a mindset change in the entrepreneurs, and also they then integrating into the value system and then trickling it down to their employees, and therefore fundamentally thinking differently in terms of how to create value. So you notice that this is actually starting to have very meaningful impact overall. So that's what I wanted to talk about broadly, and would love to, talk more as we discuss further during the panel discussion.
Thanks, Vikram. Without further ado, Shailesh, would love your words of wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, Mani, and great discussion so far. So what I wanted to do was, quickly introduce myself and talk about a few key elements that I have learned over a 20 year of doing AI across different companies. So very quickly, currently I'm at Reliance Jio as a chief data scientist. Before that, I was at Ola. Before that, at Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, and Fair Isaac Research in San Diego. And so I've seen kind of a wide variety of AI problems across the different spectrum. And I'm trying to summarize what AI is at a top-down level. And I share a lot of that wisdom on my LinkedIn. A lot of videos and talks are there. So what I will talk about today is a few key elements that I think as entrepreneurs we should keep in mind, especially from the data science and the art of data science perspective. I myself did an entrepreneur startup for 2 years in EdTech, so I can relate to a lot of that. I work with GeoGenNext, where we invite a lot of startups and sort of mentor them. And I love to work with many startups. I advise lots of startups now also. So feel free to touch base if you need any other advice, right? So a couple of things to notice as we go along, right? The first thing to notice is that we are not just an AI civilization now. We are also an internet, a connectivity, devices, a cloud, and IoT, and 5G and blockchain and what have you, right? So AR, VR, and 3D printer. So and quantum is coming, right? So I think if we think about the time that we live in is a very special time. We have convergence of many technologies that are around us, not just AI and data science. And what we can do together with all these technologies is mind-boggling, right? And that is where the next generation entrepreneurship is going to open the gates to very massive, very disruptive products at a very large scale, because combination of technologies is very important, and we have all of them now, right? So if even one of them was missing, we won't be here. And the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, and all that is very much relevant at this stage. Yeah, so that is one thing to notice. Second thing, I talk about great products, and we know great products, we know not so great products, and we understand what that is. So I'll just articulate my view on the 4 dimensions of a great product. And these are really beautiful interfaces. The interfaces are evolving towards speech enabled. So whatever you're doing, think speech enabled. not just think UX, better touch and feel, but think speech enabled. Infrastructure, again, we understand it's now available to all of us to whatever we do, think planet scale, not PC scale. Intelligence is a very important part of any product now, all the way from simple things like, payment apps to, to agriculture systems to tech to any area. Intelligence is an integral part. It's assumed that you are going to use AI, and that is a very important transition that is happening in people's mindset. For them, AI is now as ubiquitous as electricity. So if you're not doing AI, something is wrong with the product, right? That is how they think. And then integrated is another I that is very important. It is, open APIs and, interoperable and integrated, as in, connected car ecosystem, which is integrating multiple products, whether it is Google Maps or autonomous vehicles or insurance companies, and integration of multiple services together, which were not thought about as integratable before, is now going to happen, right? Smart cities and all that, they will have to integrate. So I think these four I's will make a great product in the future. And when you think about, like sustainability goals, also think about some of these ideas. Over the last 20 years, as I was thinking about what AI is to me now, and it keeps changing, I have now an architecture of AI that all of us follow implicitly. And it's a very straightforward architecture that, you start with stimulus data, which is, let's say, your Fitbit. And the most important art in data science, a lot of people in data science start with, oh, I have a lot of data, let's see what we can do with it. That's the completely wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is, these are my entities in the business. How can I define a state of that entity, right? So state of a customer, like Alison was talking about, you know, or state of a store, or state of a refinery, or state of a patient. How do I think about a state of an entity is the starting point of AI. And then how do I get to it? By looking at stimulus data. And then given the state, what actions can I take? And when I get a response, what do I learn from that? And how do I improve all these systems? So AI to me now is a stimulus response learning system, and we keep improving over time. And this model of AI is very easy to understand and absorb at a very top-down level. And every AI algorithm is either what I call a stimulus to state algorithm or state to action algorithm. And we just need to think of AI in that way, right? Can I predict and can I act on that prediction? That's all. And once you start thinking like that, then there is a lot of things that can happen in the background, but this is a very easy way to think about it. And over a period of time, we have created a template of how to think about AI in any business. And it's kind of like, you start thinking about metrics first. You have domain knowledge. You have a lot of stimulus data that is coming. And if you can list all these down, it becomes very easy to institutionalize AI in your company. And that's what I've been doing in the last 2, 3 jobs. I was looking at Ola and say, how do I institutionalize AI in their processes, or in Geo, or across businesses? How do we institutionalize it? There must be a common template, and that's what this template is. It's a very simple template. If we think about it, your metrics, your domain knowledge, your stimulus data, the state thinking for every entity in your business. How do you define a state? And then, what responses will you give if you are in that state? So if we decouple stimulus to state and state to response, AI becomes very, very simple. It's like a 2-layer process now. Yeah. And we can apply this everywhere. In my edtech, we worked on, this kind of a thing where you define metrics for a student, and you define domain knowledge, you collect stimulus data, and then you learn states of a student, right? I know this, I cannot do this, I make this kind of mistake. So for every student across every concept, you can create a detailed scorecard. And now you can think about response. Can I give you a unique topic to learn next, which video to learn next, and all that, right? So every area we can think in these 5 terms, right? And a lot of people talk about what are the biggest innovations in AI in the last 20 years. And obviously deep learning is one, and this is one, and that is one. But to me, the silent innovation nobody talks about, and this is the most important element of a good startup, which aspires to become an AI first company eventually, right? So first you're going to be a customer first or whatever business first, then you'll become data first, and then you'll become AI first. And I've seen this journey not only in my own startup, but all these big companies, all the way from Google to Geo. We are going through that journey, and every startup, including Paytms of the world, are now hiring data scientists. And you would wonder why a wallet company needs a data scientist, right? And they can become the largest, for example, ad network in the country, right? So things like that. And what is that key element? Why are these companies successful? And this is a template that all of us should think about carefully. What has Google done so special in the last 20 years? Of course, it has done all the great stuff, but the key thing they have done is they have spent a lot of time collecting label data, right? Click data. And just for that, they created a cell phone market for themselves, an Android market for themselves, a Chrome market for themselves. So a company which is a search engine company, why did it create a browser and an operating system and a cell phone? Is only for this reason, that the click data cannot go anywhere. This is how important your label data is, and that is the only unique advantage that a company has today. Cloud infrastructure, greatest machine learning models, none of them is an advantage anymore. The only advantage every company has over the competitor is their label data. Label data thinking is the biggest art in my mind in data science, right? Another thing that we are trying to work on is this idea of democratizing AI for all, which is, instead of saying this is my startup, this is what I do, this is your startup, this is what you do. When I was in edtech in doing my own startup for 2 years, I had an epiphany that if I do this for 200 more years as a startup, I will never change education system in the country. I need to figure out a way to go top down. Now, how can a startup contribute to an entire ecosystem is a very important question we need to keep thinking about. And what we came up with is this notion that every sector in the country has a lot of beneficiaries. They use a lot of apps. Each app has a lot of services, and each service has a lot of AI services. Who is going to build those AI services, right? And obviously, big companies, small companies, startups, freelancers, students, everybody should be able to contribute AI capability to a marketplace, if you will, and everybody should be able to consume AI capability from that marketplace. And if we create that ecosystem, then I think we'll be much closer to realizing a dream. Because if you look at let's say Ola as a company, they are not a speech company, but they would like to build speech enabled driver apps which can work in an Indian noisy environment. But somebody has to produce that Indian speech in noisy environment, enable that so that that can be used not just by Ola but all the other companies who need that, right? So this kind of decoupling of producer consumer marketplace of AI is a very important area of work that will accelerate everyone in some sense, right? And let me just close with this, because AI is a art, and I've given many talks on AI is an art of XYZ, and there are 3, 4 talks on that. So let me just quickly talk about some of them, right? AI is an art of formulation first, right? Today, what we are having is we have a lot of data scientists who know how to do Python level, TensorFlow level stuff, but people don't know how to formulate a business problem into a collection of AI ML problems. So people with domain understanding, with McKinsey thinking, and with mathematical thinking and AI thinking, that combination is what we need now in a next generation data scientist. So it's an art of formulation that is very important. There's a whole talk on that on my LinkedIn. It's an art of feature engineering and feature selection, right? What features make sense, what don't. It's an art of label data collection. And if you look at CAPTCHA by Google on images, click data collection, feedback collection by systems, everybody is now looking at label data in some form or the other. There are hundreds of startups in the world who only do this, which is you give them an image and they'll create a crowdsource environment to label their images, right? Your images. So label data collection is a kind of economy in AI now. And, people who know how to do this implicitly are going to be much better off, right? Model tuning is an art. Again, there's no science behind it. If it was pure science, there won't be a Kaggle competition, right? We would not be competing anywhere, because today nobody competes on let's say, shortest path algorithm in a graph because there is only one solution, right? But because AI is an art, there is no one solution, right? So therefore, all these things make a lot of difference. Another art is the art of making decisions out of predictions, right? So at FICO, we would give out a prediction score, but a bank has the ability to decide the threshold on, whether I'm more risk averse or less risk averse and all that. So there is a art there as well. And architecting AI for a company, right? I've been working in very large companies now, and I've seen how there are like 200 different AI models that are needed to run Ola or telecom or refinery, and how do you architect them together, right? Is the next generation AI thinking, which says, some models output goes as input to some other model, right? So what is that architecture is something that is an art still. There is no clear way to define that. And the last thing is it's an art of deployment also. When we think about large scale AI, should I deploy it on the cloud, on the edge? What are the trade-offs? Cost versus speed. So we'll have to go through all of that, right? So let me stop here, and we'll take more questions and discuss in the panel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Shailesh. There's a lot to chew on there, but one of the magic phrases you used is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? That reminds me of Mondrian's art. He stacks little rectangles, and the emergent effect is very interesting. We want to come back to the platform theme, but last but not the least, I know Bindu has gotten a lot of press, has an all-star investor list from the Valley, and is a budding unicorn company, is the rumor here. So take it away, Bindu. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the company, and some of the themes.
So much, Ganesh, and thanks for having me on this panel. Very nice to meet all of you. So hey, I'm from Abacus AI, CEO, co-founder. A little bit about myself. I have our co-founders on here as well, but I won't spend too much time on them. Before I was the CEO of Abacus, I was at Amazon Web Services, where I was responsible for creating a new organization called AI Verticals. So we were responsible for creating new AWS services in specific applied AI use cases and domains. Previous to that, I was at a company called Post Intelligence, which I was the CEO founder of, which basically worked on trying to figure out how to build deep learning models for social media influencers. The idea there was to see how you could give them tools to increase engagement on their social media accounts. And previous to that, at Google, I was head of product for G Suite, so Google Docs, spreadsheets, and slides. Hopefully, you use one or more of those services today. So we're a small startup. Ganesh was very nice, but we started last year. We like to believe that we're a bunch of deep learning and machine learning experts. And we're very, very familiar with building machine learning systems and models at scale in various different enterprises. Between Arvind, Siddhartha, and myself, we've worked at Google, Amazon, Uber, and built, I would say, anywhere between 10 to like 15 ML systems in these various different companies. And I've done at kind of, I would say, big tech scale, right? And Siddhartha, especially, I want to give a shout out to, was the founder of BigQuery, which is part of the core GCP stack. Anyway, so that's a little bit about us and the team. In terms of what Abacus does, we are a little bit all in on deep learning. So I think most of you have probably heard about what that is, or at least, I heard mentions of deep learning and neural nets. It's basically a set of, I would say, a technique almost, an approach to how you solve problems in the AI ML world. It's a way of developing models. And the purpose of Abacus AI is simply to enable organizations of all sizes, startups, large companies, hopefully Geo, hopefully Ola, to embed deep learning systems into their apps and business processes in a way that they can actually realize ROI really quickly. I want to make a little quick point here is that everybody is gung-ho on AI, right? I mean, this whole panel is about it. But the problem is only about 1% or less than 1% of projects which get started actually get moved to production. There's so many issues, this whole kind of art, science, unknown, all of these problems, which make it so that things are not a given, right? And so what happens is your ROI tends to be really poor. And this is true across the world, not just at like startups, not just in mid-sized companies. It's true at Google, it's true at Amazon. For example, Amazon will spend anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 engineers or 2,000 to 3,000 people teams for just their demand forecasting service, right? So our whole point of view is, how do we come up with a service, a cloud AI service, which enables you to realize ROI instantly or really quickly compared to what is the state of the art today? Right, and the approach that we've taken, as I've just said, is basically adopting deep learning at scale and enabling companies to easily build deep learning systems really, really quickly. And I'll tell you how we're doing that right now. First thing is a little bit of background about why deep learning. So if you look at the FANG companies, 95 to 99% of all of their AI models are deep learning based. So people will tell you a lot of things about, using trees, using random forest. Here is this approach, here is that approach. It's all about picking the right approach. It turns out that actually neural networks are a great hammer, which works across different approaches, right? And the proof is in the pudding. These are actually models in these FANG companies where the amount of data they've had is also varied. It's not like, hey, it only works for large data domains. It actually works for even kind of, I would say, mid-sized data domains. So as long as you have 10,000 data points, and Shailesh made the point of like, labeled data. Let's say you have 10,000 labeled data points. I would say, you're in a good place to start thinking about how you can build a neural network, which could be more performant than most of the other kinds of like approaches you may want to take. So if you look at, say, personalization on YouTube, there is one deep learning model literally called YouTube Next, which increases their revenue by as much as 70%. So that's how effective it can be. Again, to the point of deep learning, we think like as you increase in scale, as you increase the data scale, the accuracy goes up. There's another point which I think one of the panelists was making around feature engineering. This is another issue which tends to be really painful. No data scientist wants to like actually deal with picking features, selecting features, doing all the data prep. Tends to be really painful. Another really, really big win for neural nets is you can do much less feature engineering. Of course, some people like to say you don't have to do feature engineering. That's not totally true, but you can do much less feature engineering. So another reason why we chose that as, as the model, as the technology of our choice. So what is Abacus, right? Abacus is a plug and play AI service for customers to easily build production grade, accurate and explainable deep learning systems. So what we've done, which is kind of different from the industry, and as we've mentioned, the industry is very noisy, very large, very crazy, is that one, we've taken what we call an end-to-end autonomous AI approach. So even if you are a company which doesn't say have many data scientists, you can actually go to abacus.ai and have your development team, so your IT team, actually start building deep learning systems which are state of the art for very specific use cases. The approach that we've taken is very use case friendly. So you look at your business and kind of like understand what use cases make sense for you in terms of machine learning. And then you basically pick and choose the use cases that make sense. And then we have a very easy to use intuitive product, which will build a deep learning model for you at enterprise scale. So we connect into your data systems today. The service will then read that data, do auto featureization for you, and then create a deep learning model, which you can scale up and down based on traffic. And the good news is, if you have a team of data scientists, that's even better. What we do is we basically allow your data scientists to easily create hundreds of models in parallel. So you can actually tune, tweak, customize each of your neural nets. The data scientists can play around and start like multiple models, because as we all know, AI is a very iterative process sometimes, or at least coming up with the right model is very iterative. And so you can actually do this at scale using our service, which of course is available today at abacus.ai. Idea is to take weeks, not months, to move to production. So we're really pretty quick in terms of you kind of moving to production. And just as a classic example, we're working with a company called Sumo Logic. It kind of like developed their models, in I think 6 hours, in 6 hours for lead scoring. Another company we work with is Flex, which is a demand forecasting company. I mean, they actually have their planners. It's very interesting. Their planners are in Mexico. They don't have any deep learning or machine learning degrees of any sort. They build kind of state-of-the-art machine learning and demand forecasting models using the service all the time for their clients. And Flex works with companies like Cisco and Google. Anyway, so how does this all work? Like, we think that all of this is possible. The question is how? Given that there is so many parts to this process, we talked about data prep, we talked about feature engineering, we talk about model selection. How can we automate this process, right? And fundamental to what we do is something called neural architecture search. Neural architecture search is basically finding the right AI, right neural net for your data set, given a particular use case. So let's take a classic example of this, right? Let's say you're building a personalization model. Let's say you own a retail website or an e-commerce website. You have to figure out what are the right things to show to the user based on who the user is, right? So you have a data set, which is hopefully your clickstream data. And the idea there is to find the right model based on the type of data that you have. Do you have more power users? Do you have a few new users, or what have you? Today, if you're a data scientist, you would go try like multiple different approaches, see which one has the best, best result, and pick that. What neural architecture search does is pretty much automates that process. It looks at a bunch of different neural architectures, tries a bunch of different parameters, and then tries to pick the best result. So if you kind of pit, say, neural architecture search against a Kaggle competition, the state-of-the-art neural architecture search will basically be in the top 1 percentile of Kaggle winners. So that's how good automating the process of building a model has become. Now, does it win all the Kaggle competitions? No. The winner is always sometimes a human, or maybe most times a human, but the neural architecture comes within 0.1% error of the human. So it's very small error. So if you don't mind that little error, you could use neural architecture search. We also have a bunch of other kind of research that we're working on to kind of automate that process of creating models, where we think at least the art is going to come in the future. So let's fast forward 5-10 years from now, right? What is the technology that we'll have? We'll have a lot of technology to build a lot of these models. We'll have a lot of technology to do data prep. We'll do a lot of automation. But there is still a lot of art in AI. And the art comes from kind of casting your business problem into an AI problem, right? That is going to be very, very hard to automate unless we have AGI or some kind of artificial general intelligence. The idea of taking a real world problem and then saying, what kind of an AI problem is that, is going to be a hard one. Classic example, I'll give you one very quickly and I'll end, is recently we met a client. The client said that they wanted forecasting. So we were like, okay, great, we'll do forecasting for you. And you can use our service to do forecasting, really simple. But then it turns out that they actually don't want forecasting, right? They wanted to predict the amount of their utility bill. And the amount of their utility bill in the next week or the next month is actually based on their peak consumption of energy, right? It's an energy utilization thing. And the utilization is measured in every 15-minute intervals. And the utility provider basically is charging them on the peak that happens in a week for a 15-minute interval. So the thing is, they really didn't need a forecasting model. They needed a peak prediction model. And you would have to cast your data in a peak, in terms of a peak prediction model, right? So understanding, what the problem is, casting it as an AI problem or a data science problem, and then understanding what data you have or need to make sure that works, we think is a huge art. We can automate away everything else, but that is going to be very difficult to automate away because it requires human understanding, human intuition, and to some extent, a lot of experience, right? Something which comes with a lot of doing and working on these kinds of problems. I'm very glad to be here. We can continue the discussion. That's my section of the talk.
Yeah, no, thank you, Bindu. So one of the things you talked about is sort of this AI as a service or data science as a service, right? So people are starting to find business ROI. They're doing the translation from problem to solution. But one of the things that some of the naysayers or the more cognoscenti type people are starting to talk about is data science as a fair service, if you will, which sort of brings in this notion of AI and ethics and segues into what Vikram talked about with all the SDG goals. It's, the meta goal really is making sure it's fair. It's fair to really the bottom of the pyramid folks. So how do you folks think about AI and ethics? Allison, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think, AI and ethics is a lot of thinking about where AI is or is not appropriate. Because the thing with AI, sometimes for some tasks, it can be a very, very small error rate. For others, the error rate's going to be a lot larger. And if you're thinking about what happens to people when the algorithm is wrong, and if the thing that happens is something that's unjust or unfair, and the algorithm is even set up to make those things even more difficult to fix, that can be a really big problem. And we see a lot of this in crime prediction, for example, because a lot of AI is based on existing data. And if you are policing particular areas really heavy, that's where you're going to have your most crime data. And then you end up sort of doubling down on that, and it ends up having bias in the system that you might not have realized in the beginning. And one of those lessons is that you should always have complete data, which is, and recognize when you don't, and you should be compensating for it. And so I think it's a really complex problem. A lot of what we try and do is, some places will eliminate aspects of the data because they're afraid it will discriminate. And I tend to argue that eliminating that data means that you don't understand when the end results are exhibiting bias. So for example, discrimination from age, from language, from circumstance in life, that stuff might not be completely removable from the system, even if you remove that data point, because a lot of times it gets wound up in things like income or where you live. And so if you are really, you should always treat AI results with a critical eye, and they should always be audited. So you should go back and review everything. Like you shouldn't just accept everything that it is true. And circumstances change. So we've seen this with COVID, for example, really dramatically changing the economy. And so you see algorithms shift really dramatically. And if they don't have someone, at least a human in the loop, monitoring the shifts, you can end up either leaving something out or doubling down on something where you should not be doing that. So that's definitely how we consider it. We work for a lot of utilities, and they're considered to be public goods. And so it's really important that the results are perceived to be as fair and just as possible.
Thank you. Who else wants to take it? Brief comments, welcome from any of the other panelists. Just raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead, Shailesh.
Quickly. So, obviously there is a practical answer and there is a philosophy answer. So I think AI is like an innocent child. It doesn't know what it is doing by itself, right? It is all the unfairness, unethicalness, bias is not because of the algorithm itself, it's because of the data that we provide, right? So really bias in AI is actually because there is bias in human society, therefore there is bias in the data, therefore there is bias in AI, right? So I think the root cause is somewhere else. It's kind of like saying, is a car ethical when somebody drove the car, or a drunk driver killed a bunch of people, right? The car is not ethical or unethical, it's the driver. And that's what we need to work on, which is saying AI is not ethical, unethical. The data scientist behind the AI is ethical, unethical. And obviously it's that responsibility that we have, how to use these powerful tools in the right way, right? With great power comes great responsibility and all that. Therefore, I think all these frameworks are evolving. We are discovering these problems as we go along. We are now creating regulations and policies and other things around it. So hopefully there'll be automated systems to figure out, like we have, we have security review before, we launch an app. Similarly, there'll be a fairness review, which will be automated, like model training is automated. Imagine fairness review is automated. We are almost there because we can now explain everything. And, if those systems are available and automated, we will be able to do those reviews very quickly before launching the model. And I think that framework, that platform needs to be built and automated the way we have automated hyperparameter tuning and other such things. I think once we get there, that's a practical answer. But I think, yeah, it's a very important question and obviously needs a lot of thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Actually, I think it's the impact of the error is different on different sectors, right? I think Alison gave the example of the crime as an area, and I think if you look at healthcare and life sciences as an area, if you're developing a new drug, and I think if it's a matter of if you're actually developing a life-saving drug, and if you end up making that 1% mistake, and it can actually cost a human life, that's actually a huge cost to pay as compared to applying the same statistics to the energy as an area, or education as an area. So I think it's a matter of what specific problem you're talking about, and what's the direct or indirect impact you have because of that.
But that's a good point, Vikram. I have actually a contrarian perspective on this facial recognition, which people have stepped back from in the US because guns are so rampant here. For the George Floyd example, he faced 4 policemen with guns. I'd rather take a detective with facial recognition, right, in that case, and arguably Floyd wouldn't have been killed, but that's a discussion for another day. Let me segue into this sort of platform question, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, you're scared of these bigger platforms. The bigger platforms have a lot of data, so they're able to do some very interesting things. So I think when you talk to entrepreneurs, this word frenemy comes up, right? On the one hand, they want to collaborate with the partners for distribution. On the other hand, they're worried about the competitive squelching, if you will. And I know, Bindu, you spent some time with the giants, Amazon, Google, etc. Maybe you have a perspective, and then I want Shailesh to comment as well. So Bindu, go ahead.
Of course, and when you mean by platforms, you mean like things like AWS Cloud, or you're thinking more like Google versus like a startup which is like maybe reliant on Google search?
Well, the latter. The cloud is part of it. I mean, the platform gives them, you have the in the large grocery stores, right? You have the loss leader effects, which we've seen, right? The milk and egg farmers sort of used to sort of complain about it in the old days because people could sort of price that at negative margins and so on, right? So those sort of effects come into play as well.
Yeah, no, that's a very, it's become kind of a very important question of late, right? If you are kind of dependent, how much dependence do you take on a platform? I mean, frankly speaking, and maybe that's bad news, but as a startup, I don't see a way to, like, especially let's say if you are a local business or if you are a digital business, it's very hard to like kind of divorce yourself from a Google or an Amazon. You have to be part of that platform. So I would say, argue very strongly that the approach in the future, and even now, because we have so many of this, is a multi-platform approach for an entrepreneur. So it's basically look at which platforms are good for you. Like, let's take a typical, entrepreneur who's thinking about maybe an e-commerce or a retail business, right? The minute you put all your eggs into like the Amazon basket, in the future, there could be always a time where Amazon could like cut you off for whatever reason. But if you take an approach which says, hey, I'm going to spend some amount of my money on eBay, some amount on Amazon, some amount on Google, you're probably like kind of diving right into all of these ecosystems, which are, pretty much like billion people ecosystems, taking kind of like, seeing how advantageous each of these systems can be for you. And at the same time, as you continue to grow, you also come up with your own strategy, which is like, what will be my own way to get that distribution? How do I get to my customers? But my bias would be to take a platform first approach, take a multi-platform approach, and then think of like a way where you're also have an independent channel, which doesn't like kill you in the future.
Shailesh, any
Yeah.
comments on how you
Yeah.
guys are approaching things? And then maybe Vikram will have a quick comment about what he's telling entrepreneurs how to deal
Right.
with platform.
Right. So two things I keep talking about is one is don't try to solve the problems that are already solved by the big companies, right? So don't build another search engine now. You will never win that because
Believe it or not, there was somebody who just launched a search engine yesterday, just
oh,
FYI.
okay. And then,
Yeah,
what will happen is Google will catch up with you more quickly,
I agree.
even if there's something unique about it, So one of the things is, if you really are passionate about building search engines, work at Google instead of, because there's a lot of work to be done, and there's one unique thing, but there's a lot of common things, right? Between building a search engine. So one thing is you look for unique problems that those companies are not looking at now, and with energy and healthcare and smart cities and sustainability, there's a whole bunch of problems that nobody is looking at, right? We have solved search problem, retail problem, advertising and media problem, marketing problem. That's just a tip of the iceberg. There are a million social problems that are out there that need to be solved. I'm yet to see a good AI enabled edtech company, right? For example, there's a lot of content companies, books and Khan academies, but there's no AI enabled truly, like except for Newton or something maybe. So there's a lot of social areas where AI needs to be deployed, and we need to look for that. Second is look for problems in other markets where Google's and others are not doing well. So for example, in the Indian market, the speech to text models or text to speech models, or facial recognition in the Indian context kind of models, where you will have a different advantage. So look for a different problem statement, look for unique problem statements, unique market opportunities. And third area is look for different approaches which are not data hungry, but what I call, something beyond that, right? So if you follow certain other critics of deep learning now who say, look, deep learning is like a very big, what we call brute force AI, right? Throw millions and millions of parameters and billions of data points. And obviously, if you do that, something nice will come out. But that's not how humans learn. Humans don't learn that way. So there's a new breed of AI that has to come up, which is, I think, is going to change this paradigm that if you are data rich, only then you can be an AI first company. There are going to be new paradigms coming with which are more human like. With very less data, we are able to learn very complex things. How do we do it is a very important question that has not yet been answered in AI. And if we take that approach and say, can I do this with less data and reach the same level of accuracy as deep learning models, that will be a very big contribution to AI, a different approach to all this. And so these are the three big areas where I think we can be very unique and different, and yet be nimble and small. Yes, please, Alison.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
the one,
Yeah, go ahead.
just thinking about like sort of broad data platform plays, the one thing that we always look out for, so my background's also in banking compliance. So, we've always looked at legislation, especially out of the EU, and we see that regulations, anything around compliance, that stuff is contagious. And you see a lot of it being developed in the EU, and you see it's being spread around the globe. And so if you're gonna build a data company, make sure that you understand the impact of that legislation, because what's going to end up happening is it's really going to end up changing how data is collected, how data is stored. And concepts like pseudo-anonymization are going to end up being really, really important. And having really, really large quantities of data is going to get more and more legislatively dangerous over time. And I'd say look at legislation in the EU. New Zealand has very interesting legislation around this. If you want really easy to understand legislation, the Philippines has really interesting data privacy legislation. And so I'd say make sure you bake that into your business model from the start. Even if you're in the United States and it's cowboy country when it comes to data, I think that's really, really important. I also think that a big part of it is going to be, I think the future is going to be not necessarily selling data, but selling models. Because when you strip away the data, that can belong to the companies that you work with. But when you own the models, you can own something that has application across the entire economy or even across the entire globe. So thinking about data that way, and making things less about the individuals and more about the overall big picture of the data, I think is sort of the the way to address data if you're going to have things that are going to be future proofed and like compliance proofed.
So
thanks. Go ahead on platforms, and then we have to go to the closing comments, unfortunately, after that.
yeah, I just want to, I mean, since you asked about, how we are, what we are telling the entrepreneurs, and I think one of the key differences I've seen in the two categories of entrepreneurs, one who have a solution and then they're looking for a problem, a problem to solve. And on the other side, people are very passionate about solving a problem and then they are actually working on building a solution. And I think what I've seen is that technology entrepreneurs typically first develop a solution and then look for a problem. And I think the challenge with that is, somehow they try to just force fit their solution into solving that problem. And, more often they actually end up just, not scaling up their business because of that. And I think, and it's also dependent on, and since we're talking about AI, the volumes of data which is handled is very different across different kinds of problems that you solve. For example, we recently invested in a company called LUC Data, which is based out of Bay Area. They actually work with pharmaceutical companies for their drug discovery data, the omics data, which is actually huge volumes of data, whether it's proteomics or genomics. It's very hard to really handle that kind of data otherwise. And they've actually developed a platform which basically addresses the problem, bringing all that data together and then finding a way to really find patterns in those data. I think this is where I see, people who are able to really understand the problem first fully and then really build a solution around that, they actually do much better than the entrepreneurs otherwise.
No, that's a good point. One of my favorite recent examples is we all woke up in the US and really much of the rest of the world as well on 4th morning, right? The day after the elections, Wednesday morning. And it was very hard to figure out the state of play of the presidential race, right? Deep learning wouldn't have helped you. You really needed to reason with small amounts of data, and it was very nuanced. And then a couple of hours later, it took me 15 or 20 minutes as well. And then later that morning, Eastern time, somebody showed me the prediction markets pricing of the Biden contract. It had dipped as low as 25 cents overnight. And then by 7 a.m., 8 a.m. Eastern time, it was up to 75 cents. So that one chart would have given you the answer you were looking for. And maybe Alexa should have been programmed to sort of tell you that and so on. So that's a good example where deep learning wouldn't have helped. But I think, a great conversation, but we're coming up on the end of the session here. Why don't we go with a closing comment or two, a do or a don't. So some advice for the entrepreneurs. Let's go in the inverse order of the initial presentation. So Bindu, you get to go first.
Great. I would say, do think, AI is worth all the hype that you've heard of it. So think of how you would apply AI in the business problem you want to solve. So I totally agree with Vikram that you want to understand your problem completely and then figure it out and then try to come up with a solution. But also most startups don't. They don't actually think of AI from the beginning. I would say think of AI from the beginning to solve the problem. The second is I have a contrarian view to not working on things which big platforms do. See, what happens with big companies is they work on everything. So if you end up working on things which they don't do, then it's the non-exciting stuff. You have to start a food delivery service. Who knows? It may be worth 60 billion though, like DoorDash is. So, or you could choose something which is really interesting and you care about. And in a lot of cases, the platform vendors will do really well in some places, but fail in others. They try 300 things, it succeeds in 3. So work on something you're passionate about.
Thanks. You mentioned food delivery. So DoorDash just went public today, and Alfred Lin was on CNBC before I got on this panel. And Alfred Lin said, who's on the board there, early investor, he said the founder focused on the data and the inputs to that business rather than the outputs, and the outputs sort of took care of itself. So that was sort of an interesting commentary from Alfred Lin, who I'd never heard before. I think, Shailesh, you're up next for the
I think I agree with Bindu, and what I've seen is companies who bring in data scientists as an afterthought, saying, look, let me run the business, set up the operations, collect some data, then I will bring a data scientist, are really not doing right thing, right? I think data scientists should be on the table on day one. And one of the co-founders should be from data science background, one from engineering and one from business. We cannot have two. Now we need three co-founders to start with. And this is very important because whether you like it or not, you will become a AI company at some point. And knowing that now in the beginning is very important, because that is when, my favorite example is we never build a product or a service now, we build a sensor first. And this is a very important insight. Google is a sensor, KTM is a sensor, Telco is a sensor first. Because we are collecting data, we are all sensors. So you're not building a product. If you change that mindset and say, I'm building a sensor, therefore I know, for example, DoorDash and others, right? I know demand forecasting, I know all that because I built a sensor, right? So if you think like that and work backward, you will need a data scientist who will help you collect the right data at the right place and come up with your AI architecture from the get-go. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Vikram, you're up next.
Yeah, so I'll just talk from the investor's perspective. And I think one of the most important things that I would tell the entrepreneurs is that, choose your investor very wisely. And I think many times I've seen the entrepreneurs would just look at the color of the money and they would say, wherever they're getting better valuation, they would just go for that investor. I think that comes back to haunt you later on. So I think it's very important to partner with the right set of investors, especially if you're working on a technology area which you understand very well. I think you have to make sure that the investor you're partnering with also understands where your business is going and what's your vision, and if they're able to also understand and appreciate that. I was noticing, I think Bindu has raised capital from very smart investors, and I think that makes a huge difference. It actually helps create much larger value when you look to scale up your business.
Thank you, Vikram. Alison, yeah, I saw Alison and Bindu both shaking their head when you mentioned choose your investors wisely. So sounds like they have. So Alison, some advice, and then maybe Alison or Bindu, if you have anything specific for women entrepreneurs, you may want to chime in as well on that topic. We wanted to cover that, but didn't have too much time.
So I think Bindu covered talking about implementation. So I guess I'll talk about the other end. So we've been talking about the democratization of data. And when you talk about democratization, it means making things consumable. And so I think the thing that can really set AI startups apart, I think there's really great technology out there, but I think AI is starting to almost become a commodity because the improvements are starting to get really incremental. So the way that you deliver the results, the way that you help people consume and use the results is going to be more and more and more important. And designing things that are not necessarily for the data scientists or for people sort of at that high mathematical reasoning level, making things as easy to use out of the box as possible, I think is going to be really important. And I think if you are an AI startup, I think that's one of the easiest ways for you to set yourself apart and really develop really good relationships with your customers, because you're going to take the teams that you work with and no matter who's on them, it might be 6 people and you'll make it function like 60 people. And it will only work if the teams you're working with are able to use what you're giving them. And I guess if I'm talking to female entrepreneurs, I'd say it goes double for being really choosy with your investors, because sometimes you're going to need them to go to bat for you. That's the same for pretty much any entrepreneur, but I know myself as a female investor, I think having a good relationship with my investors and making sure that they have a good reputation so that they can sell me elsewhere has been really helpful. I'd also say choose your co-founder really carefully. I have an awesome co-founder who has been really with me from the beginning. I think this would have been a million times harder to build this company without him. But I think if he didn't see me as a CEO, respect my decision making, and support me on that, I think it would have been a lot more difficult road. It also helps that I had 10 years of job experience on him, so like I had a lot of industry experience that he ended up sort of taking for his own. And so I'd say like the biggest clue that someone's going to be a good partner is if they disagree with you and they listen to you and they say, oh yeah, I was wrong and you were right. And if you're working with someone who's not capable of doing that, no matter what gender they are, they're probably not going to be a good co-founder. So being able to accept influence from each other, I think, is really important, especially when it gets to the really hard times.
Yeah, Bindu, any one sentence on diversity?
Love what Allison said, 2 sentences. Women, entrepreneurs even, actually sometimes, shortchange themselves. Don't. You're great, fantastic, be bold, lean in. It's great to have more and more women entrepreneurs. I hope we'll continue to have that.
Thank you so much. I think you're the reason the audience tunes in. I heard for the main conference, there were over 10,000 people registered. We cannot tell from here how many people are watching on the broadcast site, but I think this is going to be taped. So once again, thank you, Allison. Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, Bindu. And